Bangladesh stands at a defining moment in its digital future. The passage of the Cyber Protection Ordinance, though subject to criticism, some of it valid, opens a necessary conversation, not just about protecting citizens from online harm, but about what kind of digital society we'd like to build together. We've convened this dialogue with UNESCO and the Nagore Coalition because we believe that conversations must happen between people who are willing to be honest with each other. We have brought together government, civil society, journalism, law enforcement, academia, and international partners, not to deliver positions, but to listen, challenge, and find common ground. Every government has a legitimate interest in securing cyberspace. Every citizen has a legitimate interest and a right to speak, to organize and access information freely. The question before us is not whether to regulate, but how to regulate without one right eroding the other. I've seen this tension play out in my own life. I know what it means when laws written broadly to catch criminals are used in practice to silence journalists. I know what it means when platforms face no accountability and disinformation spreads unchecked. And I know what it means when enforcement agencies, given too much discretion and too little oversight, become instruments of control rather than protection. These are not hypothetical tasks. They are reality many people in this room have lived. What we hope is that along with Dr. Joan Barata, is that the right pronunciation? Okay. We can navigate through the frameworks that matter, from the limits and restrictions of freedom, free expression in the name of security, to the principles of independent oversight, data protection, and due process. These are not abstract ideals. They're tested standards that distinguish effective cyber governance from repressive digital control. These are questions I believe we must confront honestly today. Is harmful content the same as illegal content? And does our law treat them differently? Do citizens have meaningful recourse when cyber laws are misapplied? Are regulators like BTRC genuinely independent or subject to political pressure? Can law enforcement pursue cybercrime without compromising the rights of those they investigate? How do we protect children online without building a surveillance infrastructure that threatens everyone? Justice requires that cyber laws work. For journalists and activists who face arrest under vague provisions, safety requires that cyber laws have limits. There are not opposing demands. A well-designed legal framework serves both. I hold that firmly, and I hope we leave this room having moved closer to it. What I ask of you, speak from experience, bring specific examples, propose concrete changes. This is not a conference. There are no speeches here and no audiences. Every voice in this room, mine included, carries equal weight. A summary of today's conclusion will be shared with all the participants within 1 week. We intend this to matter beyond this room. You have all been chosen for a purpose. Some of you hold positions that matter. Some bring deep professional experience and expertise. Many of you bring both. You were invited, and I'm genuinely glad that you accepted, because we believe you have a serious commitment to bringing about change. Let's get on with it. Susie.
Thank you. I think you've covered everything I need to say, but I'll be very quick because of that. So I think that from the perspective of international best practice, multi-stakeholder dialogue is the best way to move forward to make sure that we hear all of the different issues that people have, the opinions that people have, and the proposals that people have to deal with it. And this means listening to government, it means listening to civil society, listening to the media, listening to the experts, academics, etc. So the purpose of this is to exactly have that kind of dialogue. And still, you are right, we can't get everything perfect, but we try to get the best balance that we can, because we clearly need to have legislation, and freedom of speech has limits. And those limits are, again, to protect society, but of course we don't want to impinge on people's ability to express themselves. I think one of the things that I have discovered in reading this, that the important way is when we have legislation is to have good protocols that allow us to deal with situations that fall perhaps outside what was foreseen, so that there is a due process that you can go through if something doesn't work. And those should also have a way of being documented so they can be seen to be fair and open to some kind of discussion when there are issues that don't work. So again, I think it would be great to hear from all of you about your experiences with this. Everyone has a different experience, so it's important that we hear from all of you. And please, I know that Joanne and I don't speak Bangla, but if you are more comfortable speaking Bangla, and Andres, and perhaps our friends from Sweden, please, if you feel more comfortable expressing yourself that way, I think that would also be good. So we look forward to seeing how this can help to move forward and make all of the platforms and the regulation work as best as possible for the good of everybody. Thank you.
Fahim, briefly.
Very briefly, আমার মনে হয় আমি বাংলাতেই বলি। আসলে আমরা সবাই জানি যে সাম্প্রতিক সময়ে ডিজিটাল ও সোশ্যাল মিডিয়ার অপব্যবহারের এবং এর প্রেক্ষিতে আইন শৃঙ্খলা বাহিনীর কিছু পদক্ষেপ, যেগুলো অনেক ক্ষেত্রে বিতর্ক তৈরি করেছে, মামলা বা গ্রেফতার জাতীয়, সেটা আসলে সমাজের এবং রাজনৈতিক বিভিন্ন পর্যায়ে একটু বিতর্ক তৈরি করেছে। আমরা সাম্প্রতিক সময়ে আমাদের সংসদেও দেখেছি এটা নিয়ে বিতর্ক করতে। একদিকে আসলে মত প্রকাশের স্বাধীনতা নিশ্চিত করা এবং অন্যদিকে নাগরিকদের ব্যক্তিগত জীবনের সুরক্ষা ও নিরাপত্তা, বিশেষ করে নারীদের প্রাইভেসি, সাইবার বুলিং এবং ব্যক্তিগত মানহানি সহ নানা ইস্যু, এই দুটো গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ইস্যুতেই রাষ্ট্রের পক্ষ থেকে কিভাবে একটি ব্যালেন্সড একটি লিগাল ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক এবং পলিসি ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক তৈরি করা যায়, সেটাই আসলে আজকের মেইন আলোচনার বিষয়বস্তু হয়তো হবে। তো এই আলোচনায় আসলে আমাদের কাছে মনে হয় যে আমাদের এখানে অলরেডি মানে রাষ্ট্রীয় কিছু সংস্থার গুরুত্বপূর্ণ ব্যক্তিবর্গ উপস্থিত হয়েছেন এবং আরও হবেন বলে আশা করছি। এবং আমরা নাগরিকদের মাঝে ডায়ালগের মাধ্যমে এই ব্যাপারটাতে এক ধরনের সুস্পষ্ট ফিউচারিস্টিক এক ধরনের পলিসি ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক তৈরি করতে পারবো, এবং সেটাই আমাদের আশা। এবং এই ব্যাপারে ইউনেস্কো এবং গ্রিক যে ভূমিকা নিচ্ছেন সেটার ব্যাপারে আসলে আমরা ধন্যবাদ জানাচ্ছি, এবং উই আর ভেরি হ্যাপি টু বি পার্ট অফ দ্যাট। থ্যাংকস।
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon once again. As I mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and I've been working on issues related to freedom of expression, access to information, but also platform regulation in different parts of the world in this. In the recent times, I've worked a lot with UNESCO, providing legal support, but also training judges, regulators, journalists, lawmakers, etc. In this area. And I wanted to take this opportunity just to frame the discussion with a few thoughts that I think that are important to take into account within the context of this discussion, from the perspective of international human rights, which is, of course, a relevant framework, a necessary framework of this discussion, since, of course, Bangladesh has ratified the most important human rights treaties, so in principle they should also be inspiring the legislation of Bangladesh. The first thing that we encounter here, the first element of this discussion, of course, has to do with cybercrime, cyber security laws. The existence of legislation in these areas is, say, something that I would say it's even not only necessary but also desirable in order to, of course, protect the interactions, communications using digital channels. Of course, the risks of fraud, impersonation, phishing, let's say stealing data, guaranteeing the security of financial transactions is a must. There are at the international level already several treaties dedicated to these matters. The Council of Europe, for example, many years ago adopted the Budapest Convention on cybercrime, that was then ratified by many countries beyond the Council of Europe, so it had become a reference at the global level, but also we have nowadays a recently adopted UN Convention on cybercrime, the Hanoi Convention, that my understanding is that Bangladesh is considering also ratifying this convention. However, we need to understand that there's a difference between tackling cybercrime in relation to crimes that are directly connected to the use of the digital space. And here we are talking again about fraud, phishing, interception of communications, stealing of data, affecting financial transactions, and the use of the term cyber security to kind of persecute activities that take place in the space online, but do not necessarily need this online space to take place. No? And here we're talking about speech. Speech is something different, and something that has been criticized by international organizations, or has been recommended by international organizations to states, is that states shouldn't use cybercrime legislation to create new forms of illegal speech. That is a very important principle. It's not that hate speech or defamation shouldn't be illegal. They should be illegal, but you don't need to create a different, new, separate category of hate speech or defamation just to apply it to the online world. Because usually when legislation does such a thing, does it in order to introduce a definition that is much broader, far less precise, that opens the door to control speech online in ways that can be even more intense than the way speech is protected offline. No? So in many cases, I mean, the key issue is that what is legal is something that basically should apply both online and offline. Harassment is harassment, doesn't matter where it happens, how it happens. Hate speech should be hate speech, doesn't matter how it happens, where it happens. Try to, again, use the concept of cyber security to introduce vague provisions, to criminalize very vaguely defined attitudes or behaviors, such as spreading rumors, spreading non-confirmed information, stirring hate, things like that, that can be interpreted in a very open manner, would contradict international standards. That's the first idea. The second idea is that, again, the cyberspace should be regulated, but it is very important not only to have precise, clear regulation targeting cyber-dependent activities, but also this legislation should be implemented by bodies that have a sufficient level of A, expertise, and B, independence. Since very important fundamental rights are involved in the use of the cyberspace, the intervention of authorities in this area should be based first in knowledge, good knowledge and expertise of what we are talking about, but also a sufficient degree of independence. And this is, in terms of comparative best practice, where we have, it's true, there are cybersecurity, cybercrime institutions in many countries, but these institutions are not appointed. They don't have government officials as members, and they are subject to very strict judicial scrutiny. And also, I think that it is very important that these laws in the area of cybersecurity, cybercrime, contain very specific provisions safeguarding the right to freedom of expression, and particularly safeguarding the rights of journalists, for example, the right to protect their communications and to protect the confidentiality of sources. It's true that in some cases, I mean, you can intercept, law enforcement could intercept certain communications when it comes to preventing a crime, but these provisions should also be accompanied by specific safeguards to avoid that these cannot be used to spy, to surveil journalists. For example, the European Union has recently adopted a law called the European Media Freedom Act that contains specific safeguards when it comes to surveillance provisions, the use of surveillance techniques affecting journalists. So that's the first thing that I think that some general remarks on how we need to understand the need to protect cybersecurity and cybercrime. It is something that we need to do, but it's something that we need to do within certain limits. The second thing that was mentioned also by you, I think it's a very important discussion, and we need to have a proper understanding of the difference between illegal and harmful content, particularly in the online world. Of course, what is illegal offline should also be illegal online. We already said that. No more than that, no less than that. But it's true that in some cases there are behaviors that are not illegal, they shouldn't be prosecuted, they shouldn't be persecuted, but they might be harmful within the context of the society. For example, in most liberal democracies, disinformation is not illegal, basically because defining disinformation in objective legal terms is impossible and would lead to the creation of a ministry of truth, and we don't want that. So disinformation is not illegal, but at the same time is considered to be a harmful behavior that, let's say, needs to be tackled through other policy instruments. And also here, the role of online platforms is particularly important. Online platforms have a margin to define what is harmful, what is not acceptable in the context of the respective platform. So the role of laws and policies should be to incentivize, to introduce duties of care for platforms, to adopt certain responsibilities when it comes to avoiding the dissemination not only of illegal content, but also harmful content. But this should be clearly differentiated within the law. One thing is to have a piece of illegal content on a platform, and here, of course, we need to understand that there will be a judge, an independent body that will address the platform and ask the platform to tackle that matter. And the other thing is talking about harmful content. Here, it's not about specific pieces of content. Here, for example, in Europe, we have the Digital Services Act that says that platforms should be transparent in the way they handle harmful content, that platforms need to adopt certain mitigation measures when it comes to harmful content. Platforms need to be transparent when it comes to the algorithms that they use to promote content, but states cannot indicate specifically what should be harmful or not in references to specific pieces of content. This is a differentiation that I think that is important to take into account. The fact that harmful content is not illegal does not mean that the law cannot introduce certain duties of care, particularly for platforms, regarding the way they handle these kind of problematic content. That was the second reflection that I wanted to express here. When it comes to this second matter, I need to particularly stress the fact that UNESCO has a series of guidelines regarding the governance of online platforms. And these guidelines precisely define this kind of responsibilities, that platforms need to deal with harmful content, they need to deal with it in a transparent manner, and when dealing with it, they are even also subject to fundamental rights requirements, to the respect of fundamental rights. I think that this is where the discussion around platform regulation, should take place. And there's a third area, because I think this is also, and I don't want to take much of the time, I understand and I acknowledge that these are very complex topics, and each of the topics that I mentioned would require, I don't know, a 2-day seminar, but the third one would be the issue of data protection. My understanding is that you already have 2 acts and an ordinance regarding these matters. I think that data protection compared to online platforms is something that is, from a comparative perspective, even from a human rights perspective, something that is more consolidated. We already have certain standards, certain solutions that have been there for decades. And for example, they are crystallized in Europe in the GDPR, the data protection, the regulation, so that the model is relatively clear. But of course, when I look into the proposals, into the ordinances and the laws that there are in these countries, from the perspective of an international lawyer, what I see is that there are some things that they need to be further discussed and considered. The first thing is that in data protection systems in many parts of the world, there is independent oversight. There is a body, a data protection agency that is in charge of making sure that the law is properly enforced. But this data protection agency is in no way a government body. Members are not appointed by the government, they are appointed by the parliament with a special majority following a certain procedure, and there's no way they can receive instructions from the government. I think that here, this is a discussion, this is something that is still missing in this country, the creation of an independent data protection agency. Secondly, when it comes to the use of regulatory power, the bodies that have the power in the field of data protection, when you read the law, you see that they have huge power to have access to all sorts of data in their activities of monitoring and inspection, etc., without practically no safeguards. That can also be problematic. In many cases, these measures should not only be adopted by an independent body, but in many cases, also depending on the type of data collection that authorities may be doing, you even need the authorization of a judge. And this is something that is, I don't see in the legal framework here, and this is something that we can also discuss. Another thing is that we need to be aware of the fact that there are limitations in terms of jurisdiction. We can only cover the treatment of data, the processing of data that takes place in the country. Trying to expand the scope of data protection rules beyond the limits of the country is something that is probably not realistic, technically complex, and affects the very idea of jurisdiction. It's fair to say that, for example, France tried to do something similar a few years ago when it comes to Google, and there was a French court that said, and even the European court said, you can only have jurisdiction over your territory, you cannot go beyond that, for example. Another issue is penalties. I believe that this is an area where the infraction of the law should not be criminalized. I don't think that criminal law is the appropriate instrument here. If you want to foster an economy based on data, you cannot use the criminal law as a threat in cases of, let's say, not fulfilling the legal obligations. Also, the laws are very vague when it comes to these matters. And there's also the issue of the protection of children when it comes to access to data. Here, I think that establishing limits when it comes to the capacity of minors to kind of have access to their data by certain actors is commendable. But we also need to understand that if we have these kind of provisions in a legal system, you need to have age verification mechanisms. Age verification mechanisms that are efficient, that are effective, and that properly protect the right to privacy. So let's be careful sometimes with these kind of provisions when introduced in laws, because then you need to have proper verification mechanisms, proper ways to make sure that these laws are properly implemented. No? And in countries where you still have a significant digital divide, I mean, the absence or the fact that some people may not have these age verification mechanisms may imply that they may not have access to certain digital services simply because they cannot prove their age. No? So that is something in terms of the implication of the enforcement of certain provisions that needs to be taken into account. So these are, I mean, some reflections regarding the new legal landscape that we see that is opening up. But I would like to finish also by emphasizing that beyond digital, beyond the new areas, I mean, still in Bangladesh, there are plenty of laws affecting traditional media, affecting freedom of expression in general that probably need to be updated in order to be fully aligned with international human rights standards. So let's not forget about that. Also, traditional media, when it comes to traditional media, non-digital, analog, also there are elements, access to information, safety of journalists. There are provisions that are still lacking, things that still need to be done, probably laws that need to be repealed, and we shouldn't be neglecting that. The digital world is important, but not everything is digital, and we shouldn't forget that. Thank you very much.
Excellent roundup. We've got a few new people who've come in. Perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, everybody. It's Rehan Asad. I'm advisor to the Prime Minister and responsible for IT, Telecom, and Science and Technology Ministry. Thank you.
Yeah, if you could introduce yourselves. Apni,
Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. My name is Abir Mojumdar. Currently, I'm working in the intersections of media, cybersecurity, and intelligence. These are the three intersections that I'm currently working in.
Hello everyone, my name is Navin Rajwal from Sri. Good afternoon and apologies for coming late. My name is Paula Castro Nederstam, First Secretary, Human Rights, Democracy, Rule of Law and Gender Equality at the Embassy of Sweden in Dhaka.
This is Zafar Hassan. I'm from Commercial Bank of Ceylon, where also I'm a part of corporate banking, but also look after the digital transformation.
My name is Ashok Borua. I am the Executive President of Bangladesh Buddhist Federation and the Chairman of the Shoko Shakai, and also a co-convener of Voice for Reform. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Sadiq Mahmoud Islam. I'm a journalist. Thank you.
So now it's a general discussion period. I mean, I think we've got two very important people, very relevant people. Perhaps I could pass it on to either of you to take on board. Okay. Matthew, anyone? Take global.
Thank you for the honor. I'm going first. Try and make my remarks brief and specific to the topic under discussion. I'd like to preface my comments with the idea that in an era when technologies can be tweaked in seconds and minutes, problems can be addressed very swiftly. And most countries have, in many countries, not most countries, but many countries have already have regulatory models that work. We're still playing catch up with our laws. We're still at a stage where we're at the tail end of addressing some of the issues under discussion today. The topic, broadly speaking, revolves around platform accountability, social media, and freedom of expression. So I'll kind of touch on the question of platform accountability and what the current legal framework provides. So if you look at the Cyber Protection Act that was legislated this year, which is has been sort of taken from the ordinance during the interim government, and of course somewhat a legacy of its predecessors from 2018, 2023, we see there is nothing in the law that actually holds the platforms accountable. There are no positive obligation on social media companies and other intermediaries to proactively address online abuses, harmful content, illegal content. From a more practical perspective, what we have seen, and we've seen a lot of our colleagues handle, like Blasters in the room here today, they've also handled a lot of complaints, but the complaints are made by victims themselves against other individuals, but nothing in the law can directly hold the platforms liable unless you're relying on vague provisions around aiding and abetting of offenses, which again is a very difficult case to prove in a court of law. And then you sort of move downward and you see there are something that resembles a notice and take down mechanism. Notice and take down mechanism, again, is very poorly drafted. There are established models that we could have taken inspiration from, but right now, the model that exists in the law, I think it's in Section 8, unfortunately, barely addresses, the ways in which it should be done, relevant procedural guardrails. In reality, what it seems to do is to empower certain regulators, specifically BTRC, to send requests, which again are not binding orders, with no real obligation on platforms to really take them down or action those content. And as a result, we've seen that there have been incidents of online conversation escalating into offline harms. The other point I would like to make very briefly, before I pass on the conversation to someone else, is that the recent amendment to the Telecom Act is quite startling. There is a conflation between telecom services and online service provisioning of online services. This conflation of telecom service providers with online intermediaries, which begs the question, are platforms now required to be registered under Bangladeshi law? Are they subject to the same penalty regime as legacy telecom service providers? And if so, what does that mean in terms of freedom of expression, and privacy, especially since we now have more comprehensive provisions around interceptions and surveillance? So these are some open questions I hope members present here today could potentially address. If not, these are serious questions to be considered moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Priya, would you briefly introduce yourself, please?
I am sorry I'm late. I'm Priya Sanchaudhary. I'm a lawyer at the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, and I also work at Dr. Kamal Hussain as an associate.
দুটো পয়েন্ট এখানে বলার আছে যে আসলে আমরা অনেক লই মেক করছি, কিন্তু আসলে এক্সিস্টিং যে লগুলো আছে সেটার ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনের জায়গায় আসলে কতটুকু কাজ হচ্ছে এ ব্যাপারে আমরা কতটুকু সচেতন। এবং সেকেন্ডলি আমি যেটা বলতে চাই যে ব্লাস্টের একটা প্ল্যাটফর্ম আছে, আমি জানি না আপনারা কতটুকু এটা সম্পর্কে অবগত। এটা হচ্ছে CSWC, হুইচ ইজ সাইবার সিকিউরিটি ফর উইমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন। সো আমরা এখানে এই প্ল্যাটফর্মে আমরা উইমেন এবং চিলড্রেনদের সাইবার সুরক্ষায় কাজ করে থাকি, এবং আমাদের সাম্প্রতিক সময়ে যে ঘটনাগুলো ঘটছে সেটার ডাটা কালেকশন থেকে শুরু করে তাদের সুরক্ষায় কী করা যায় এ ব্যাপারে আমরা কাজ করার চেষ্টা করছি। তো আমার সবার কাছে এটাই আবেদন থাকবে যে এরকম আরও প্ল্যাটফর্ম যদি আমরা তৈরি করতে পারি এবং আমরা যদি একসাথে কাজে এগিয়ে আসতে পারি তাহলে হয়তো আমরা একটা বেটার আউটকাম পেতে পারি। থ্যাংক ইউ।
I see you have a lack of volunteers, so this is more coerced than it looks. I'd like to begin by actually reading out a little bit of what was sent to me from a victim. I've worked with victims of enforced disappearance, so this is a BNP activist who was picked up and then disappeared for a very brief period, after which a case was filed against him under the then Digital Security Act. And he said that so I'll read it out. 5 বছরে 4টি ডিজিটাল নিরাপত্তা আইন মামলায় সিএমএম কোর্ট, মহানগর দায়রা জজ আদালত এবং হাইকোর্টে 205 বার হাজিরা দিতে হয়েছে। কোনো সপ্তাহে 4 দিনই আদালতে যেতে হয়েছে, এমনকি জামিনে থাকা অবস্থায় র্যাবের রিমান্ডে যেতে হচ্ছে। What this essentially means is that he had to appear before a magistrate at least 4 times a week. The way the law was used was to file cases against you, and it was never intended for those cases to succeed. It was well understood they wouldn't, but the harassment was the point. Surprisingly, the same has begun happening with the Cybersecurity Act, even though the preamble of the Act says that the reason the Act is being put in front of Parliament is because the previous law was used to harm freedom of expression. It is therefore very ironic that the Act itself is being used. But this is not a flaw of the Act, I would like to point out, because the 2 sections that are being used, 25 and 26, don't actually... Cyber Protection, Cybersecurity Act, yes.
Now it's called
Cyber Protection Act. The 2 sections that are being used, 25 and 26, actually do not allow law enforcement to do what they're doing. You can arrest somebody for speech offense in 2 instances, for sexual harassment, and the other is if it directly incites violence and leads to violence of that kind. I can give examples of 7 people who've been picked up as yet in a period of 29 days. So that's every 4 days 1 person has been picked up. And they are random people. So 35-year-old housewife, 16-year-old student, 22-year-old student, and they're spread across the country. So we have from Moymanshing, Munshinganj, Bhola, Thakurgaon. It's well spread out, and it's in a very short period. What it does is it sends a message to people that you cannot speak. So I went through what they had posted, which resulted in this reaction, right? What was it that they're posting that resulted in law enforcement arriving at their doors and filing these cases against them? You'd be surprised how it's very innocuous. They're jokes, and they're not particularly good jokes either, and they may offend the sensibilities of many. It is well understood. I think one of the jokes was calling a minister somebody who smokes weed. I mean, I can understand why the minister would feel offended by it, but whether it would necessarily require picking up a 16-year-old and filing a case against him remains very, very debatable. And it is further debatable because what we're celebrating, what I've seen being celebrated, is that all of these cases, the victims, if one can say, are getting bail. And people celebrate it. They go like, oh, okay, it's different from the previous era because they're all getting bail. And that's true, they are getting bail. But I want to highlight the experience of the BNP activists from the previous era and say the getting bail is merely the start of the story and not the end of the story. Once they get bail, they have to keep appearing in front of a court. They don't have the money for it. They have multiple cases filed against them in various jurisdictions, and they do not have the money to appear. They don't have money for getting lawyers. Their livelihoods are disrupted, their studies are disrupted. It has happened over and over again. Our caseload at the Commission was about 2,000 cases, give or take. And then the survivors, the vast majority of survivors had false cases filed against them. And they would come to us and complain of the one thing that said, please do something about our cases because we cannot financially afford appearing before the court so many times. It is therefore quite difficult for us to see a return to a similar regime. It is not an identical regime, I want to highlight this. And I will end by saying this, that I think on the 2nd of May, the Prime Minister said this will not happen further and that the government will not keep picking people up for speech offences, because the Cyber Protection Act is not a lèse majesté act like Thailand, for instance. It's a very different format. So he has said this. It would be good if that is actually implemented, and a secondary message goes to law enforcement at the same time that I remember you said that there is no legal definition for disinformation in many countries, because as you said, it would require establishing a Ministry of Truth. It is not simply possible. The thing is, the things that were being posted by these 7 people don't even fall under disinformation and under any even broad definition of disinformation. It's what we would call in Bangla অরুচিকর কথা. But that's it really. I mean, to be arrested for অরুচিকর কথা when you're like a 22-year-old, it's an insane activity. I would hope that going forward, I do not have any criticism of these sections of the law. I think the sections of the law are fine. But the way they're being used right now does not make any sense. They're being used as if the previous law still exists when it does not. Thank you.
Thank you. Priya, yes, please.
Hi. We've always had many vague laws, and we continue to have those vague laws. And of course, you yourself, Shahidul sir, have been a victim of one of those laws, which is Section 57 of ICT Act. But after that, we've also had the DSA and CSA, and then after much advocacy, we now have the Cyber Protection Act. But unfortunately, many are unhappy with it, not just because the law is problematic, but also because the arbitrary practices continue. So of course the law has many problems. It's structurally problematic. Of course it got rid of many of those vague provisions from the earlier laws, but then it still continues to have this one provision at least, which is very vague, which talks about bishrinkhola chorano and udbeg chorano and stuff like that, and we don't know. Those could be subjectively interpreted, and those are actually being abused already, whether it's against an 18-year-old because there's been a mob outside his home for posting some kind of cartoon or something, or whether it's against another random woman for posting something on Facebook. So we still have those provisions where it is possible to abuse, but it's actually a little beyond the laws now, because we've seen not just the use of the Cyber Protection Act, but also the use of, say, the Anti-Terrorism Act and so on, to actually suppress some kind of expression in some way or the other. And it's purely because of the arbitrary police practices that go on. It quite doesn't change because it was always like this. And there are some safeguards. Earlier it would be through some guidelines from the Supreme Court. Now some of those are entrenched within our law through some amendments which came about during the interim government within our criminal code. But nobody is following those, nobody is enforcing those safeguards, and so the practices go on. On the other hand, when we see that some victims of actual online violence are going before the police to file a case, they are actually not doing that, saying that, oh, we can't file this case, or they are discouraging them, or maybe they are not even aware of whatever little flawed laws we have. Because under the Cyber Protection Act, we now have, it does criminalize offenses such as disseminating intimate images without consent, or other form of online sexual harassment and so on. Maybe those are flawed, but those are there. And the police, it hasn't happened only once, it has happened a number of times to our clients that they go to the police station to file a case and the police doesn't accept. On the other hand, we see that random cases are being filed saying that someone has defamed someone, maybe in power or so on, under this act, whereas such a provision doesn't exist under this particular law. So it's a bit of a mix. The vague laws are there, but also the practices which are not only applicable to this particular law, but also applicable, because if the practices or the safeguards are not enforced properly, then all these practices will go on. So that's what I just wanted to say that much. Thank you.
কেউ বাংলায় বলতে চাইলে বলেন, মানে ওনারা বাংলা জানেন না বলে আমাদের ইংরেজিতেই বলতে হবে তা না। প্লিজ।
সরি, আমার কলিগ যদি সময় নিয়েছে আমি একটু আর একবার বলি। হ্যাঁ, সো কয়েকটা বিষয় যে প্রিয়া আপা যেটা বললো প্লাস থেকে যেটা আসছে ওইগুলোকে যদি ফোকাস করে একটু বলি, যে মানে একটা হচ্ছে যে এই যে র্যান্ডম মানুষকে তুলে নিয়ে যাওয়া হচ্ছে বিভিন্ন কমেন্ট, বিভিন্ন পোস্ট, এগুলো তাদের ফেসবুকে বা অন্যান্য মাধ্যমে ছড়ানোর জন্য। কিন্তু আবার আমরা একই জিনিস দেখেছি যখন আসলে অ্যাকচুয়াল থ্রেট ছিল, মানে কথা ডেইলি স্টার এবং প্রথম আলোর ক্ষেত্রে আমরা দেখেছি বহুদিন ধরে তাদেরকে থ্রেট করা হচ্ছে, এবং যেদিন ঘটনা ঘটেছে সেদিনও অনেক লম্বা সময় ধরে অনেক কথাবার্তা হয়েছে। সেখানে কিন্তু আমরা আসলে অ্যাক্টের যারা, আমরা কিন্তু তার কারোই ওইভাবে রেসপন্স দেখিনি, না মানে প্ল্যাটফর্মের, না ফেসবুক মেটা তাদের, না আমাদের এখানকার লোকাল অ্যাক্টর যারা, তাদেরও আমি দেখিনি। সো আসলে এই জায়গাগুলোতে আসলে অ্যাকাউন্টেবিলিটির জায়গাটা কোথায়, দ্যাট ইজ মিসিং। অ্যান্ড অলসো যখন মানে আমাদের এখানে যে কোনো আইন যখন করা হয়, প্রথম কথাটা যেটা বলা হয়, ইজ ফর দ্য প্রোটেকশন অফ উইমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন। বাট আমরা যদি আসলে একটু দেখি যে আসলে কত সংখ্যায় উইমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন এই আইনগুলার আন্ডারে প্রোটেকশন নিতে যায়। আসলে উমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন কতগুলো কেস ফাইল করে না, আর কতগুলো কেস আসলে পলিটিক্যাল এজেন্ডার জন্য হয় বা অন্যান্য কারণে ইউজ করা হয়। সো এই সংখ্যাটা যদি ইভেন ফর দ্য টেক ডাউন নোটিস, বিকজ এইটা নিয়েও আমরা বিভিন্ন সময়ে বিভিন্ন মিক্সড ইনফরমেশন পাই। আমাদের এখানে যখন আমরা যারা হচ্ছে সাইবার সিকিউরিটি এজেন্সিতে আছে তাদের সাথে আমরা যখন কথা বলি, তারা বলে যে তারা স্পেসিফিকলি উমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন রিলেটেড যেসব ভায়োলেন্স ঘটে সেগুলো নিয়ে তারা মেটাকে বা অন্যান্য যারা আছে প্ল্যাটফর্ম কোম্পানিজ তাদেরকে হচ্ছে টেকডাউন নোটিস পাঠায়। কিন্তু আমরা আবার যখন প্ল্যাটফর্মের কাছ থেকে শুনি, তারা আবার ভিন্ন রকম একটা মত দেয় মাঝে মাঝে যে আসলে মোস্ট অফ দ্য কন্টেন্ট আর অ্যাবাউট পলিটিক্যাল। হ্যাঁ, মানে উমেন অ্যান্ড চিলড্রেন রিলেটেড কন্টেন্ট আসলে অত আসে না বা সংখ্যায় অত বেশি না। সো এটাও আসলে একটা বিষয় যে আসলে আমি যার নাম নিয়ে আইনটা করি বা যার জন্য আইনটা করছে সে আসলে বেনিফিটেড হচ্ছে কি না। আর এবং প্রিয়া আপা যে কথাটা বললো যে আসলে আইন যখন হয় একজন পলিসি মেকারের পার্সপেক্টিভ, তারা যেইভাবে চিন্তা করে বেগ রাখে, যেই কথাবার্তা যেইভাবে চিন্তা করে যে আসলে এই শব্দটা কতভাবে ব্যবহার করা যাবে, কিন্তু ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনে যারা আছে তাদের কিন্তু ব্যবহার আবার ভিন্ন হয়। হ্যাঁ, তারা আবার সেটাকে কিন্তু আবার ডিফারেন্ট ভাবে ইউজ করে। সো আমাদের ওই জায়গাটাও আসলে একটা ক্লারিফিকেশন আসার দরকার যে আসলে আইন যে বানাচ্ছে পলিসি মেকার তার ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন এবং আমার ফিল্ড লেভেলে যে ল এনফোর্সমেন্ট এজেন্সি আছে তার ইন্টারপ্রিটেশন কি আসলে অ্যালাইন্ড কিনা। হ্যাঁ, যদি এটা অ্যালাইন্ড না হয় সারা জীবন এটার একটা মিসইউজ হবে। অ্যান্ড অলসো আরেকটা বিষয়, দ্যার আর কনফিউশন অন দ্য লজ, যেরকম আসলে রেগুলেটর কে। হ্যাঁ, ইয়াতে বলা আছে হচ্ছে বিটিআরসি, আবার এনসিপির কথা বলা আছে। হ্যাঁ, সো হু ইজ দ্য রেগুলেটর। হ্যাঁ, এই ধরনের যে কনফিউশনগুলো আছে এটা আসলে এইটার কথা আসলে কে বলবে। আবার আমাদের হচ্ছে টেলিকমিউনিকেশন অ্যাক্টের আন্ডারে হচ্ছে অনলাইন কন্টেন্টের রেগুলেশনের কথা বলা আছে। হ্যাঁ, সো এইগুলো ব্যাপার তো আসলে যত ক্লারিফাই হবে তত আসলে মানে আইনটা যত পরিষ্কার হয়, তা এটা আসলে আমাদের কাছে মনে হয় যে ল এনফোর্সমেন্ট এজেন্সিদের জন্য আসলে বা অন্যরা যারা এই আইনগুলো নিয়ে কাজ করে তাদের জন্য সুবিধা এবং আইনের আসলে মিসইউজটা কমে। সো আমরা আসলে চেষ্টা করছি এই সবগুলো আইনকে একসাথে রিভিউ করা এবং আসলে কোন কোন জায়গায় গ্যাপগুলো আছে সেগুলো একটু দেখা, এবং কোন কোন জায়গায় ডেফিনেটলি ভালোও হয়েছে, ইটস নট অল অ্যাবাউট পুরোটা যে খারাপ সেটাও না। সো সেটাকে অ্যাপ্রিসিয়েট করে। সো আই হোপ TJL will come up with a paper very soon, and আমরা will share it with all of you, so we might have a discussion that and we'll
Come in new, could you please a one-liner introduction?
Thank you. Sorry for my delay. My name is Mahruk Mohyuddin. I'm in publishing with UPL, and I'm also part of Nagorik Coalition and the Forum for Women's Political Rights. Thank you.
Please.
Hello, I'm Zamilur Reza. I was part of the drafting process on some of the ordinances that came during the interim, so yeah, I'm also working at ICTT. Yes.
What we are speaking about that we need a nuanced interplay between
safeguarding digital infrastructure and upholding the rights of freedom of expression and information.
We see that the platforms where we interact and we do businesses, we do express ourselves, owned by multinational agencies, and they are not located in our under our jurisdiction. Hundreds of times where the victim, whether it could be a government agency or a political leader, they complain, they file complaint to Facebook authority, and they do not pay any heed because they have other business to do, they have limited workforce. And in many times our agencies or our government authorities they're also using bots to report any profile or Facebook account which is creating disturbances in their perspective. So they're using bots, and it makes the work more complex for the Facebook and for the victim also, because they need to verify every complaint and they have little time to verify every complaint. So there will be a late response from them. So we need for our side, for the government side, we need a more smart and effective way to interact with the Facebook authorities, or we know we have 80 million Facebook users in our country, 70 million TikTok users in our country, and a majority of them are young and underaged, especially in the case of TikTok. So, and the algorithm fails to understand their language, their expression, because it needs a human insight to judge any expression, any comment. So we cannot depend on algorithms, whether it is using by us or the Facebook. So the problem is not only technical, it is very widespread, because we have, government is always cautious, government is afraid of disturbances, of militancy, etc. So they react. And if in many cases, we have understood that if you act less, the result will be more better, because every action creates more complicated reactions from many corners of the society. So if you abstract a influencer who is living abroad, say is living in Paris, he is instigating to burn a media house. He creates instigations. So what could our government do? If you abstract him, if you ban his account, he will create more videos and more accounts. And it happens. So we need to tolerate something, because those people who we see, who we understand as a creating disturbances, social anxiety, we need to understand there are many other people who will oppose them in social media or on other platforms. So we need to create an atmosphere where they can oppose each other. So if you jail someone, many other person will react. So that will create more uncomfortable situation for the government. So we need sanity in reporting against contents, and we also need our data sovereignty. We already have a law. We need to implement that to protect every person's data. And our in the case of cyber security, our government sites are very vulnerable to phishing, to hacking, etc. So we need a check, a vulnerability check in every 6 months, because those are not only government websites, they are storing public data. So it is a must to check a vulnerability test in every 6 months, and then take opinion from the experts and use tool to protect them. We need to deliver more resources for this site. So again, I have only one point to. We need a sentimental analysis. I know many government agencies is doing that on social media. So if you see that a section of society is creating, or they create a attitude which will outburst. So we need to put flag, a red flag, a green flag, a orange flag. Red is a dangerous situation when government or authority should act. But in the case of green, which will a innocent lie, which will not harm anyone, a comment against a political leader, this is not an important thing to address. But we need to address the red level sections of the society. So government should understand, should know everything, but not to act on every occasion. That will be a more effective and smarter way to deal the things. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, for all your interventions, I think you have raised many important topics, I believe. I have a few comments. The first one is on platform liability, because it's quite tempting to say platforms are now liable for all the content that they host. But if we adopt that position, we are basically delegating the regulatory power in private hands. Because if you're telling platforms from now on, you are responsible to define what is legal, what is illegal, well, not to define, but to assess what is legal, what is illegal, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. The platform may play that role, but then they will do it in a completely opaque manner, and it will be the platform, not the judge, not the regulator. It will be the platform. It's a privatization of regulatory power, which is extremely dangerous for freedom of expression. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I understand your complaints, and I hear them a lot in many countries. Platforms don't listen, platforms don't respond, etc. But there's a fundamental element here that creates this situation. I'm not saying that platforms, of course, because of their business interests, because, of course, they want to avoid issues, they want to avoid to enter any, complicated situation. But also, there's something that really helps platforms to adopt this position, which is legal uncertainty. In markets where there's legal certainty, platforms are forced to do things. Because there's a clear law that says, okay, if you get a request from a judge, this is what you need to do. If you operate in this market, you need to have a legal representation in this market. If you receive a complaint from a civil society organization, you need to handle this complaint in this way, and you have the legal obligation to provide a response to that civil society organization. If you have all these things in a law, then platforms will have no excuse. But if you have a legal system that is broad, open for interpretation, where we really don't know what is legal, what is illegal, depends on how you interpret it, the platforms will say, look, you're telling me that this is illegal, but I don't know. I read your law, could be legal, could be illegal, I don't know exactly how to proceed. And exactly what is the consequence. So, if you look into more regulated markets, and I'm not talking only about Europe or the UK, I'm talking about Australia, even Indonesia, Brazil, even India to a certain extent, where the behavior of platforms is clearly framed, then of course, the possibilities to push them to do things change in a completely radical manner. Just today, the Irish regulator, which is the regulator of Meta, because Meta is in Ireland, has opened an infringement procedure against Meta because Meta is not properly allowing users in Europe to choose the kind of algorithmic moderation that they want. That's a legal obligation. There was an investigation by the Irish regulator. They said, you are not doing this job properly. I open an infringement procedure. Meta will even have to pay a fine. Well, that's a completely different landscape. So, it's true that platforms may not be tempted to engage, but partially that's because of the lack of a legal framework that clearly defines the duties of care, the responsibilities of platforms. I think that this is very important. Then also another reflection about the spread of bad content. And this is a reflection that I always do in many countries. In many cases, platforms reflect the reality. So if you have a polarized society, social media will be polarized. You have a society with, let's say, very harsh people expressing themselves in a very harsh, strong manner in the streets, in the universities, in other areas. The same will happen online. So, sometimes we use platform regulation or platform prohibitions to solve problems that are deeper in our societies that need to be addressed through social cohesion, constructive policies, education, literacy, etc. So in many cases what is said is that you cannot completely get rid of bad content online, but you need to live in a society where bad content has a lesser impact. because people are more educated, because there's alternative good content that is also available, because you also have access to media that are professional, that are ethical, and therefore you can compare, etc., etc. You have a good state broadcaster, you have fact-checking, etc., etc. No? So it's not about, you cannot police the networks and now we are going to eliminate everything that is bad. But we need to do as much as possible so that good things are there as well and people understand how to handle the bad things. No, it has been proven that disinformation has a very low effect in plural societies and liberal democratic societies because, of course, you have access to reliable sources of information and then you will not believe what you see because someone says something and you don't believe that. Just to put an example from a different country, I remember that it's a simple one, but I think I like it. And it's a personal experience. I remember talking to a judge in a certain country. The judge was saying, we need to tackle this information because people say that my salary is $10,000 a month. And then I asked the judge, but is your salary public? And he said, no. And then, well, if your salary was public, then even if someone says that you make $10,000 a month, it would be obvious that it is a lie because your salary is transparent. If you are not transparent, you're opening the door to misinformation, disinformation, etc., etc. No, so that's another. I think that, as you say, I mean, when it comes to bad content online, particularly hate speech, what is important is to tackle this kind of content that can be associated to harm in the real world. Because otherwise, the only thing, if you prosecute something that is, say, not tasteful, that is offensive, but it's just that, then the only thing that you are doing is amplifying it and victimizing those who spread this type of content. Just focus on really harmful behavior, true incitement to hostility, to violence, not other things. No, I think that is the other thing. And of course, I mean, something that has been mentioned here, we don't have a solution for that, but we need to be aware of the importance of understanding the difference between having laws and enforcing the laws. Without good enforcement, you can have the best law that you can imagine, but without a proper understanding from judges, from law enforcement, from all those involved, then it will not work. If you live in a country where the law enforcement will ignore the law and do something else, well, then the problem is not only about having a good law, it's about something else. No? So I think that this reflection, having good regulators, having good law enforcement, having good lawyers, at the end of the day, good judges, is also as important as having good laws. No? Thank you.
Kind of what are the key issues, the points raised, and what's really important. I'm an engineer and I always try to think that, okay, how are we going to move forward, how are we going to solve the problem? So when we are talking about the cybersecurity, there is a three aspect of cybersecurity. There is a technical aspect, there is a legal aspect, and the application. As Dr. Berta just said, oftentimes we say this, I heard from the audience, the law is problem, there is a lot of issue. I heard from the audience that no, law is not the problem, it's the application of the law could be challenging. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not going to make a judgment that whether law is perfect or law is not perfect. But what I will say is that first I want to focus on the technology aspect of the cybersecurity. If we look at sitting in my chair and looking into the actual situation of our country's cybersecurity, I would just say that we have a long way to go to protect public and private interest and information from a cybersecurity point of view. In today's world, our information are not just with us, it's with multiple platforms. For email, we are using one platform. Probably for ordering food, we are using another platform. For multiple purpose, for banking, we are using other platform. So when we think of a cybersecurity, the security threat can come from multiple dimensions, not from one dimension. So it's really important to understand that what government can do and what is the role of the government, what is the role of the private sector, and a cybersecurity agency, or as per the new law, the new cybersecurity agency, what is their role? Why the role interact with PTRC and other agency, and how we can safeguard the people of this country. So it's really important that last 1 hour that we talked different aspect of human rights and the violation of the law and all this thing, but I'm taking completely different tangent. I'm focusing on cybersecurity first. Looking into cybersecurity, with all due respect and where we stand, I would be the first time to say we have a long way to go. We just started this journey. We are assessing our entire country, government sector and private sector. Where is the vulnerability? I'm so thankful that the gentleman said about the vulnerability assessment. In any modern country, you do a rigorous vulnerability assessment, and not just in the government sector. You need to look into the private sector. There are more personal data lies in the private sector than in the government sector. So if you just protect the government sector and you say, no, I have no responsibility for private sector, then you will not protect your citizens. So the agency just started the work. We need to equip the agency with the right people, right tool, and I would just say that we're not running yet. We just start crawling to walking, but we are really trying to move fast here. One other thing, what's important is that there are multiple laws passed, multiple initiative has happened during the interim government, and there's an interrelation here. The cybersecurity law is one, PDPO, which is personal data protection, is one, NDGO, National Data Government Policy, is one, and then telecom and IT policy. Yes, each are individual laws, but there is an interrelation and there is a correlation and interdependency. So you can't just take and look into one, you have to understand the interdependency and how it will help each other and how it correlate each other. One of the things I would highlight that what this administration, this government has formed, and after the formation of the government, we have around 30 days to review the ordinance what interim government has passed and go through and decide that whether we go to parliament to pass those or not to pass those. Dr. Berta says that it's really not right to have the criminal, don't prosecute through the criminal part or criminal law for a lot of these offenses. And one of the first things we identified when we formed the government, in the PDPO, Personal Data Protection, and NDGO, the law has the provision for the criminal prosecution, which is not the practice internationally. We looked to GDRP, we looked into US, we looked into Europe, we looked into Japan, and within that short term, yes, there is a provision of prosecution, yes, there is a provision of civil liability, civil cases, but we have changed from the criminal to the civil. I won't say that what we have passed is perfect, no law is perfect, it's the application what matters, and it's the continuous evolution what would be important as we move forward. Aside from the cybersecurity threat, when it comes to, there was a lot of discussion about the platform. So I would just say one thing, that I returned back to Bangladesh after almost 22 years, this late November. And when I did the online traffic analysis before the election and after the election, I'm sure that you all know that more than 60 to 70% of total online social traffic is bot traffic, not actual traffic. I repeat again that the people who does the traffic assessment and the source assessment, more than 60 to 70% of the traffic, the comments, the reactions are bot traffic. So it's very important for us to understand the organic versus inorganic traffic. If we do not, and I do not know that what other country in the world has such a high inorganic traffic for whatever the reason. So it's really important that like us, the regulator, the civil society, we need to work with the platform, and it is really hard for platform to also distinguish between organic versus inorganic. When I have this discussion with one of the major platform players, they have said that sometimes in 2023 or 2024, they have taken action and they have deactivated a huge number of traffic which was coming from a bot traffic. So when we are talking about online traffic, harassment, cyberbullying, all these things, it's really critical for us to understand what is the core issue, where it's hurting the most, which are the people, which are the account causing all these problems, and then go after the key problem rather than overall issues here. The last thing I would say that it is critical that we think of personal data protection very seriously, and if we cannot protect the personal data, then there is a cybersecurity impact, and then there is a financial impact and also legal impact. What we are trying to do right now is that if we look into the data, and I'll go back to the gentleman, your comment on the vulnerability assessment. We already started doing that, and what we are finding is that multiple organizations in Bangladesh, on both sides, public and private, does not have the basic protection layer to protect the individual data. Just to make a light comment before my end, that there are very critical private companies and government companies have their username as admin and password as password123. If I tell that which organization, probably will have a heart attack, but that is true, that both on public sector and private sector, very critical places, the system admin has a username as admin and password as password123. This is in today's world, that's just a crime. You cannot sit in a system administrator job in a critical governmental infrastructure or a private financial company and have such negligence. So this is why I said at the beginning that I've been told that I have to be very careful, don't speak like an engineer, you have to be thoughtful, the comment you made. But I would say that we have a long way, we have a long journey. We have to educate our people, we have to build our platform, we have to have the right tools, and we have to apply the law correctly. We just started the process. It will be a journey. I'm sure it will be, we'll make mistakes, we'll have challenges, but we are committed to take this journey along with the entire civil society, the journalists, the rights group, and to protect our citizen and protect our country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a telecom regulator, and I will confine my discussion to only content moderation with the perspective that cybersecurity and freedom of expression are complementary, not contradictory. And I will remain also strictly confined to experience only. I'll bring in some ground realities. A lot of points have come up. Let us also see what's happening on the ground. BTRC does only content moderation. That too, BTRC does not judge any content. Whether a content is harmful, malicious or not, we are not here to judge. We receive requests from various authorities, including cybersecurity agency, law enforcement agencies, and etc., 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 so that a content needs to be taken down. And depending on that, we coordinate and instruct our local operators or international platforms, and etc., etc. If I just go through a little statistics, then we'll have some insight. For example, in last 1 year, we had requested to various platforms, both at home and abroad, various platforms, around 27,000 posts or links to be taken down. And out of that, 17,000 were taken down, which is around 63% of what we have requested. So the insight from here is that at least 37% disagreement we have with the service providers or platforms. Why do we have this disagreement, and where do we have this disagreement? If we break it down a little further, we have further insight. If we see the links or posts related to suicide or self-harm injury, 100% were taken down. Safety, child abuse, 98%. Nudity, adult content, 79%. Terrorism, 75%. But on the other hand, the highest request that we get is about misinformation, disinformation, fake news, etc. And the taking down percentage is only 56%. The second highest request we get about hate speech, 53%. More interestingly, which we think is very dangerous, harmful and dangerous acts, only 24%. Misleading impersonation, only 21%. The insight we get from here is the wider that you have the range of potential subjective interpretation, where this range is wider, you have more disagreement. So then the first challenge begins. Many of you have tried to highlight. The first challenge is legal challenge, that many definitions are actually, I will not say vague, but it's open to wider interpretation. But on the contrary, as Dr. Barata also alluded to, it is nearly impossible to define everything objectively in cyberspace. So which means there will be always a subjective interpretation, and we need to better cope with that. So the discussion is how better we cope with that. If we see in our new Cybersecurity Act, earlier there was no due process. There was no clear due process. Now we have due process. It is said we have a judicial authorization requirement, authorization by a tribunal we require, which is true. But then, as I said, that in many emergencies, there is no time to take this approval. So the executives, law enforcement agencies, they have to call a shot of judgment. It will always be there. They will have to be allowed to call a shot of judgment. So this act allows them call a shot of judgment, but with a restriction. Restriction means within 3 days, they have to take an approval or authorization from the tribunal. That creates the first challenge, because if you have seen, BTRC is not mandated to flag, judge the content. So if there are other agencies who are judging the content, requesting either directly or through cybersecurity agency to BTRC, and BTRC is requesting somebody else. And meantime, the one who had requested, within 3 days, he is supposed to take this authorization and send it to BTRC and BTRC to media. If not, then after 3 days, that link or that post has to be opened. That creates a technical challenge for the regulator and for the service providers, because from many platforms, once you have taken it down, after 3 days, how do you take it up? That is a new challenge that the Act has created. So this, I think, it needs to be addressed somehow. Let us talk of the role of the executives, or the capacity of the executives. When I say executive, I mean those who are enforcing. All executives, whosoever the stakeholders are, they're supposed to have the capacity to detect and distinguish a crime. There we have a lot of room to improve. Earlier, the role itself was not very defined. Somebody has already said that people do not know whether BTRC is regulating or somebody else is regulating. This act has given a better clarity. However, the role needs to be further clarified. Even if I give you an example, even we get orders from court. Court is ordering BTRC to furnish them with some media content, the mainstream media. Even the court is not at times sure what to ask from whom. It is because there is a confusion about the role of the task. We have also a huge room to improve on interagency coordination in developing capacity. Because the role is not defined, so we do not know who should develop what capacity. For example, if I give you an example of last year, say the Ministry of Women and Children, they are concerned to protect women, also online. So they were thinking they should have a cyber team who should give the online protection. Now you see, they may be experts on social affairs, on women affairs, on children, but they are not experts on telecom. They are not experts on technology. So if the technological platforms are developed by them, so what the technological people are doing. So this interagency coordination, this culture needs a huge improvement actually. And if I may say, that is one of the root problems why our progress is so slow. Then coming to, I'll take a little time. Then coming to executives, as I was saying, those who will call the shot, they will have judgment. They need training on how to interpret. I'm not talking of intentional misjudgment, that is beyond correction, that's a different thing. But about how to interpret and identify the crime, this is where I think we need a wider training program and etc. etc. What BTRC does, BTRC now and then at a functional level, we sit down with law enforcement agencies, cybersecurity agencies, and our telecom operators at a functional level to exchange view about what sort of problems they're facing and how to interpret things and how to report particularly. But this is not enough. I think international experts, local experts, platforms, we need to regularly sit down and train ourselves. There is another serious issue is lack of public awareness about the available agencies, reporting agencies, who to go to. Somebody having a problem on cyber world, where does he or she go to? I've heard from last that they have a platform. I don't know, this is the first time I've heard. I myself do not know. Many people, we do not know what platforms are available for reporting. There is a serious awareness gap that we notice. BTRC does not have a mandate of judging the content, that's okay. But all the requests ultimately boils down to BTRC, and BTRC blindly sends it to. BTRC does not also have a mandate of rejecting requests. I think BTRC should have. As a final check, BTRC should have, if not of judging the content and selecting the content, at least of rejecting, so that the difference, 37% difference of opinion that we have, that reduces. Then let us come to practicing how platform governance or the service providers, how we are interacting with them. All the platforms, I mean international platforms, local platforms, they are supposed to have capacity to prevent harm, protect vulnerable groups, and ensure safe environment. That is globally understood. Local service providers have limited capability. Local service provider, particularly say mobile networks. The mobile network operators or MNOs, they have a better capability. They have still limited capability of self-regulation of adult content sort of thing, nothing beyond that. ISP, they hardly have any capability of self-moderation, self-regulation, hardly any capability. When they are tasked to block a content, they have very limited capability. So we need to improve there. Larger platforms, for example, Meta, for example, YouTube and etc. They have a mind of their own, means they have their own rules, they have their own judgment, and they have their own enforcement system. It's not always, and again Dr. Barta was hinting up, it's not always that they will listen to you. They have their own mind. Then another challenge comes in the difference of opinion between the platform standards and the local laws. Although our laws are evolving and their laws are also evolving, I see a hope that slowly and gradually this gap is reducing. But mind my words, significant gap still exists between the viewpoints of local and other laws. Opaque content moderation, you have already said, I will not go to that. We see a requirement, serious requirement of fact checking, and this fact checking requirement is increasing every day. That's a practical problem that we have. But we have very, very limited fact checking capability, and about the international platforms, what capability they have, that is also very opaque. That is also not very transparent. We need to find out. Response time. As I said, 63% requests they have kept us. But with what time? Oftentimes we have seen that was taken down after the damage has been done. So that response time is still huge. I think recently, this year, India has passed a bill, 3 hours rule. So they say to these international platform operators that once government marks a harmful content, they have to take it down within 3 hours. I don't know what is happening with the implementation, but a rule has been passed. Platform operators are supposed to, and they should, morally also, they should help us by sharing identity of the offenders. Although, IG was supposed to be here, police could say better, but they are cooperative, but not cooperative enough and not fast enough in cooperating on these issues. That they should do. Platform localization, there are issues which have also come up, legal presence that we need in the country. Moreover, the respect to local language, local context. Many platforms, at least Meta is trying, after pursuing for long years, they are trying to have some respect and some dedicated agents for contextual analysis, but that is not enough. Platform liability, as you say, platform liability pressure, yes. Previously, there was no Data Protection Act or ordinance in the country. That itself was a pressure. Not having a law, protection law, was a pressure for the. But when we had the PDBO that the Honorable Advisor was referring to, the Personal and Data Protection Ordinance that we had, then they had different pressure. They had a problem with data localization because that had mandated data must be localized. Data localization, then criminal liability for breaches, arrest provisions, financial penalties, etc., etc. However, when this was reviewed and converted into act, many of those were addressed in the end. If I may say, from our experience, what are the points that we suggest for improving this platform accountability or platform governance? I would say we'll have to strive to keep reducing the gaps, the legal gaps between, and which is happening. Then again, you have said about algorithmic moderation. We need a transparency of how these platforms are using algorithms for their moderation. This remains opaque. We should ask them, maybe through you, that at least what they can do is they can limit the reach of any unverified post. Let them work with the verified posts, but they should limit the reach of the unverified post. This is what our experience is. We also suggest AI is becoming a new opportunity and a threat. We cannot control that, but at least we can mandate that every AI content must be marked separately. We give an indication that is an AI content and leave it to the audience to judge how they take it. We also want to be bold in saying that the platforms should not censor people who are already widely accounted for. For example, mainstream media. Mainstream media has an accountability. For example, elected officials, they have a wider accountability. So whatever they post, platform should not censor that because they have already wider accountability. Say, let me refer to a case in Nigeria in 2001 and 2002, those of you know. Twitter deleted, it took down one post of President Buhari. So Nigeria had banned Twitter. It remained banned for about 7 months. So they had to reinstate the post, and they had gone and registered in Nigeria. That's an interesting case. Then local legal presence mandating is not far. It's just last year. Brazil had mandated that. Brazil had banned X for not having their legal presence in Brazil. They banned it for 2 months. Then X had to send a representative. So I don't know how we can be that bold, but we need to. There are transparency report published, these are okay. Local service providers, in our case, they cannot charge the content, that's okay. But as we said, illegal contents, there is nothing to be charged about illegal contents, particularly when it comes to adult content, online gambling, etc., etc. I think our local service providers should be compelled to have capacity to at least handle this illegal content. I will summarize saying, non-regulation is not an option of ensuring freedom of expression. Because over-regulation, yes, I understand, but non-regulation has a risk of increasing communal violence, gender-based harassment, fraud, and all radicalization, etc. But we'll have to begin from legal instrument. And the legal instrument, the success would depend on how well this is interpreted, how well this is implemented, but I like to highlight more on how it evolves. We have not discussed on that. About evolution of these laws, if I'm allowed to give an analogy, we are a flood-prone country. We can imagine in a situation where a village in the or a suburb of town is suddenly flooded, where the earth is under the water, and if you have 2-3 feet water above, you don't see the earth anymore. You have a new surface, water surface, but you see the marks. You have plants and trees and these poles and that pole, which marks that there was a road under this water. There is a canal under this water. In this analogy, if you say the earth's surface was our physical world and the water surface is what the internet brings, then we come something close to what Dr. Bharata was trying to say, do not invent new crime. A hate speech is a hate speech, there in the physical world, same in the digital world. A theft is a theft in the physical world and digital world. What we need to do is, we need to identify the markers. But if we don't do that, why it has happened? It has happened because in technology world, we have started with the wrong foot. The moment we have said cyber security, the cyber world came first. So technocrats led all this move of cyber security, etc., etc. And we have ignored the word security. And for security in the physical world, we have different measures. Now we are correcting ourselves. That's okay. But okay. India again has done one thing. When legal instruments evolve in the right way. You see, 21, 22, there was a farmers' movement, you remember. There was a lot of tension going on. Twitter had declined to take down those posts. But the government could force them to take down the posts because their IT rules of that same year had mandated that. Authorization and reporting of content moderation, to be clear and realistic, as I have first pointed out, that in our Act today also, ambiguity remains. In case of capacity building, I would say defining roles and developing integrated capacity, that's a very, very important issue. And then efficient coordination mechanism. If I may also highlight, this is another a very Achilles heel that we have. Inter-agency coordination mechanism had always remained very vague, and that's why the responsibilities could not be always performed. So now the Act opens up a way. Local language moderation, training is important of all, judiciary, law enforcement agencies, and regulators. I will end by saying I cannot overemphasize awareness, the need for awareness. I will not discuss on that, but I will just highlight a very interesting trend that if you have noticed, deepfake video. We have first noticed during the Russo-Ukrainian war, at the beginning of the war. We have seen President Zelensky's deepfake video, etc., etc. In our country, we started facing it after July Revolution, July Uprising. Seriously, we started facing it. This time, right before the election, the law enforcement agencies, their primary concern was that deepfake may create havoc. But nothing has happened. On the contrary, please note that. On the contrary, what has happened is deepfake did not divert people wrongly. The reverse has happened. People have stopped believing in real videos. You may laugh, but that's, you see. So what I'm trying to say, people learn fast. So awareness could be actually our real tool to handle this. You can give a lot many examples where you can see that people are learning very fast and people are not being fooled right away. So let us use that. Thank you.
That was very useful and surprising to find such a candid response from the government. I hope this can be an example for the future. We're coming close to the end. Before I sum up, we have some people from the embassies. Would you like to say something? Do you have an observation? Any comment?
I don't think I can contribute much substantially to all the experts in the room. So just to say that these are global challenges, right? And in Sweden, we're also facing similar dilemmas in terms of legislation to give more increased national security against rising threats to democracy, such as disinformation and such. But this also, of course, places our kind of traditional, highly liberal approach to freedom of expression also at play in the light of the securitization also within our legislation. So it is very much an ongoing debate, a central debate also in Sweden. So following also these dynamics in Bangladesh with great interest.
To Banglai boli, but English bolte pari, not a problem. But I think that firstly I have to sort of congratulate the advisor and the BTRC chairman, because I think this is the first time being in the policy sort of realm, having this advisors coming and listening to others. So even talking after you, I think that's also a break of the rule. So I want to take that advantage of it as well. যদি অনেক কথাই বলা হয়ে গেছে, just তিনটা point I think from UNDP we want to highlight. Regulation is important, no doubt about it, but regulation without a human rights perspective and a lens becomes a problem. So I think that's also important when we talk about the regulation, how we also embed that when we sort of looking into the regulations. But also I think with the act, the rules is also very, very important. I think where the rules are not specific, vidhi jokhon ashole sposhto hoy na, I'm sure the lawyers are here, but what we are seeing in the policy realm, jokhon apnar vidhi is not very focused, then you have a room to interpret the way we want to interpret, both the state actors and the non-state actors. So I think that when we want to have the rules more specific and focused, we have less chance to really interpret the way we want to interpret. The other one is the oversight mechanism. I think oversight mechanism, I'm very happy to hear that inter-ministry coordination, যেটা আমরা সবসময় বলি টেবিলের এই প্রান্তে, আপনারা টেবিলের ও প্রান্ত থেকে এটা বলছেন, which is very important for us to register, because this is very important when you talk about the oversight mechanism. এবং oversight mechanism, what would be the role of individuals is also equally important. Agency is easy to create, but the agency also need to have that mandate that they listen to other voices as well, which we have not seen it. And of course, third but very important, we talk about algorithm biases, we talk about AI, but I think that we all also understand that AI ke to ashole badha jabe na, it's a technology always stepping up to the next level. But what we want, I think that abar arekta policy hole bodhoy apnara bolben abar policy, but I think that going forward AI policy is very important, because again we are talking about the regulations and the governance because AI is not a separate, it's all interrelated, integrated, and also talk about the whole governance issue. When you talk about data, everything is around that. And I think that other thing that we have also picked up working on different issues, even on the transboundary, is the financial security. I think the cyber security also, I'm sure that has talked about it, but I think they also need to sort of focus on some of the cryptocurrency discussion that is also very important, and it is a growing concern within the boundary, outside the boundary as well. So I think the cryptocurrency, which also have a regulatory issue, financial risk, that also has an impact on the social cohesion discussion that we are also having. So with that note, thank you.
We'll come to an end. I'd like to ask three people, Fahim, yourself, and there's a journalist from Shamokal. If it would be good to hear from one of the journalists as well. Fahim, please. Acha, Rajiv, Shamokaleর Rajiv, বলবেন কিছু?
আমি আজকে যেহেতু বিলম্বে আসছি আমি আজকে থাকি।
আচ্ছা, ঠিক আছে।
Thanks. I'll be very brief কারণ বেশি সময়ও নাই. I'll take opportunity to actually thank Ministry of ICT particularly. মানে একটু কনটেক্সট দিয়ে রাখি যে যেই সাইবার প্রোটেকশন অ্যাক্ট সিপিএ নিয়ে যেটা কাজ হয়েছে, মানে ইভেন অনেকে তো জানে না যে পিপল লাইক শহীদুল ভাই এবং আমাদের এই নাগরিক কোয়ালিশন অ্যান্ড লট অফ আদার পিপল ওয়ার ভেরি হ্যান্ডি অন দ্যাট। কেননা যখন এটা ড্রাফটিং করা হচ্ছিল আগের মানে ইন্ডিয়ান গভর্নমেন্টের সময়, তখন ইট ওয়াজ এ মাচ মোর ড্রাকোনিয়ান আই উড সে। তো তখন আমরা আসলে সিভিল সোসাইটি থেকে প্রেশার দিয়ে এটাকে মাচ মোর মানে নন ড্রাকোনিয়ান করেছিলাম। লট অফ থিংস লাইক অ্যারেস্ট করা যাবে, এগুলি করা যাবে, এগুলিকে অ্যান্ড উই আর অ্যাকচুয়ালি মানে গ্রেটফুল টু দ্য প্রিভিয়াস ল অ্যাডভাইজার আসিফ নজরুল ভাই, মানে হি অ্যাকচুয়ালি লিসেন্ড ভেরি কেয়ারফুলি। তো মোটামুটি এবং উই আর ভেরি হ্যাপি দ্যাট ওটাকে অ্যাজ ইট ইজই নিউ গভর্নমেন্ট পার্লামেন্টে পাস করেছে। দে কুড হ্যাভ অ্যাকচুয়ালি স্ক্র্যাপড ইট অর চেঞ্জ ইট ওটা। তো সেই অর্থে এবং এটা কিন্তু আসলে মাচ মোর মানে অনেকে ডিজিটাল সিকিউরিটি অ্যাক্ট বলে, ওটার থেকে এটা অনেক ডিফারেন্ট, হ্যাঁ, অনেক মাচ মোর হিউম্যান আই উড সে। কারণ যেই জিনিসগুলো নাবিলাও বলছিল, যেই আইনগুলো দিয়ে আসলে বলা হয়েছিল যে সিপিএ অনুযায়ী অ্যারেস্ট করা হয়েছে, অ্যাবসলিউটলি সিপিএ অনুযায়ী কাউকে ওই ক্রাইম দিয়ে অ্যারেস্ট করা যায় না, হ্যাঁ। ও দিজ আর কাইন্ড অফ মিস ইউজ অফ দ্য ল ডিডন্ট অ্যাকচুয়ালি অ্যালাউ। সো সেটা একটা ব্যাপার। আরেকটা ব্যাপার আমি শুধু যেহেতু বিটিআরসির সম্মানিত চেয়ারম্যান সাহেব বলেছেন, এবং ভেরি ইম্পর্টেন্টলি যে প্ল্যাটফর্ম গভর্নেন্সের ক্ষেত্রে একটা জিনিস কিন্তু আমাদের ভুললে চলবে না যে ইন্ডিয়া অনেক কিছু করতে পেরেছে। অফকোর্স উই নো দ্যাট ইন্ডিয়া ওই সময় টুইটারকে বাধ্য করেছিলেন, বিকজ ইন্ডিয়া অ্যাট দ্য এন্ড অফ দ্য ডে ইজ ভেরি হিউজ মার্কেট ফর দ্যাম। আমাদের দেশে কিন্তু যতই আমরা বলি না কেন, ফেসবুক, ইউটিউব, অফকোর্স দে ডু বিজনেস, বাট ইট ইজ নট দ্যাট অ্যামাউন্ট অফ বিজনেস যেটা দিয়ে আসলে প্রবাবলি ইউ ক্যান নেগোশিয়েট কমার্শিয়ালি। So but it may take some time. But একটা জিনিস হচ্ছে তারা যেটা আমরা যখন কথা বলেছি, ইনফর্মালি বলেছিল, they are really মানে they don't want that kind of মানে liability, they want something intermediary liability protection, something that তারা যদি তাদের এখানে কোনো একটা কন্টেন্ট হয়, if government actually তাদের লোকালি আসলো, মানে সার্ভার বন্ধ করে দিল, লাইক দেয়ার সব কিছু উঠাই নিয়ে গেল, দে আর ভেরি স্কেয়ার্ড অ্যাবাউট দ্যাট কাইন্ড অফ সিচুয়েশন। তো সেই জায়গাটায় অ্যাটলিস্ট সাম কাইন্ড অফ কম্প্রোমাইজ করা যায় কিনা, যে না এটার ক্ষেত্রে মেইন লায়াবিলিটি উইল বি দ্য কন্টেন্ট যে দিচ্ছে, বাট প্ল্যাটফর্মের লায়াবিলিটি উইল বি লিমিটেড, ক্রিমিনাল লায়াবিলিটি ওভাবে থাকবে না। এবং কিছু কিছু কান্ট্রিতে করা হয়, ইন্ডিয়া ক্যান অ্যাকচুয়ালি ইম্পোজ দ্যাট থিং, বাট প্রবাবলি উই আর নট ইন এ সিচুয়েশন অন এ কমার্শিয়াল টার্ম। সো টিল দ্যাট টাইম মানে ওদেরকে যদি নাই আনি না, তাহলে এখন একটা জিনিস বললে চলবে না, আমাদের 1.5 কোটি মানুষ দেশের বাইরে থাকে। আমরা যতই কিছু করি না কেন, লাইক এই 1.5 কোটি মানুষ পোস্ট যখন করবে, আমরা তো তাদের কিছুই করতে পারতেছি না যদি প্ল্যাটফর্ম আমাদের হেল্প না করে। তো তাদেরকে আনাটা খুবই জরুরি, ছাড় দিয়েও যদি আনা যায়, তারপরে আস্তে আস্তে তাদেরকে এই প্রসেসের মধ্যে নিয়ে আসা। সো দ্যাট ইজ সামথিং দ্যাট ইউ প্রবলি অর দ্য মিনিস্ট্রি প্রবলি ক্যান থিঙ্ক অ্যাবাউট ইট ইন এ গ্র্যাজুয়াল থিং। ওকে,
thank you very much. I really appreciate the candid conversation we've been having, and more than anything, I feel that there are more opportunities for us to collaborate, civil society, government, and other actors in the room. I'll try to keep it as specific and as concise as I can, and elaborate on some of the observations that have been made in the last hour or so. So I'd like to start with something that Dr. Joanne Barata mentioned about platform liability, that assignment of responsibilities to platform is, it could be seen as privatization of regulatory responsibilities of authority, which is bad for freedom of expression. To some extent, I do agree with that stance, but at the same time, what the Cyber Protection Act is currently lacking, and something that desperately requires, and which is something already there in comparable legislations in the EU, in Australia, in the UK, is platform accountability more from the perspective of platform design, platform processes, and platform systems, which is not there. So at the end of the day, Major General Bari has mentioned that certain things needs to be done, but how do we how do we compel the platforms to do them? Because there are no legal basis to start with. So we need the legal basis. We need a major overhaul of the current legal instruments, as Major General Bari mentioned, that we should start with the legal instrument, but it needs to be structured correctly. Right now, in its current form, it's not. There are too many ambiguities and there are too many gaps in the legislation. The second point, with reference to what Mr. Rehan Asif Assad mentioned, focusing on the term cybersecurity, I think it's an interesting it would be an interesting intellectual exercise for us to sort of separate, or at least consider separating cybersecurity from content governance, because these are two fundamentally separate issues. And the moment we start conflating one with the other is the moment we start facing not only interpretation challenge but also enforcement challenges. The third point and the penultimate point is with respect to the Data Protection Act. Sure, it's a better version of the draft than what we've seen 4 or 5 years ago, without data localization provisions, without the penalty regime, punitive penalty regime. But what's really slightly concerning from my vantage point is the fact that there's an 18-month grace period given for which broadly aligns with the GDPR model. But the challenge I have with this 18-month grace period is EU's had decades of experience, sort of evolving its institutional, its legal, its jurisprudential sort of foundation to get to a stage where 2-year grace period made sense. Bangladesh does not have those foundation to begin with. So, and nothing has been done, because this act has retrospective effect from 5th of November, if I'm not mistaken, of last year, which means we've already lost 5-6 months, and nothing has been done to actually raise awareness and to ensure that companies going forward are being compliant. So I would like to see more activities on that front. And the last one, the last point I would like to make is again going back to BTRC and Major General Bari, is that thank you very much for sharing some of the statistics. These are not publicly available. We would appreciate if we could get similar statistic going forward on the number of takedown requests sent, action category-wise, without having to necessarily go through the RTI route, which has its own share of challenges. But it's something, these sort of information for researchers like us are very helpful when we're having conversations about platform accountability, why they're actioning certain content, why are they not? Is it necessarily because of the legal system, our legal system, or gaps in our legal system, or something more to do with their community standards, so on and so forth. So I think from a research perspective, I think it's very important that we have these information. Thank you very much.
We started exactly at 4 and I intend to end exactly at 6. The publishing sector, please.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to be very, very brief, and I want to join the earlier speaker in thanking the Honorable Advisor and the government to, be really engaged and interested in the conversation. So I think that itself is a very strong signal. I don't want to go into the nitty-gritties or the details, but I think I'm sorry I missed part of the conversation on freedom of expression, which is something very close to not just my heart, but also it's an integral part of our profession. So I just wanted to highlight that it's very important that we get a very strong signal also from the government that you're committed to protect freedom of expression at all levels. So I think if there are feedback from the society or the civil society or the citizenship that the government is falling short on sending that strong signal, I think it's very important to see where the areas of improvement are. So and I think it's very important for us to know that there is strong political will of the new administration in protecting freedom of expression. So for example, we want to be able to publish everything and anything, of course, with due process, and put it out there for the readers to judge. And I think that's very much aligned with creating awareness and literacy, which Dr. Barata alluded to. So it's important that that happens. And then of course the legal frameworks are there. So very briefly, since I'm also involved with the Forum for Women's Political Rights, and we've been looking at the technology-facilitated gender-based violence, it's very important to have clear definitions of what is GBV and how, at what levels one has to, act and also find the perpetrators. So, of course, there are a large number of bot actors, but it is possible probably to find the common sources where the bots are being generated. So, so those are, one of the two things that I wanted to highlight. And thank you so much.
Of course.
I want to make sure that we stay on the time, but I'll give you just literally one-line response that on the freedom of expression, I wholeheartedly agree what you said, and that's also the position for this government. But one thing I would say that the fact-checking is really key, and this is not just a government responsibility. 78% people in Bangladesh believes what they see in the social media. The only country after Brazil who believes on the news point of view. I'm sure you have seen that there are a lot of fake photo card which looks like a newspaper, like they just change one letter or one word, they keep the color template, and it circulates everywhere. I've seen it, I'm sure all of you have seen it. So yes, it's a responsibility of government, but it's also responsibility of the civil society, the news media and others, because if 78% of the people, and it's even more alarming, 87%, the people who lives in rural area sees what they believe, like they believes what they see in the social media. So yes, freedom of expression is critical, but fact checking is really important for our country to make sure people doesn't get diverted to the wrong direction. One thing, Mr. I'll say that I really appreciate all the hard work you guys put on the cybersecurity. I can say huge thanks for that, and to the interim government. From our government, we did not change a single word of the act you guys have worked. We reviewed it multiple times. We went through, we read, reread. That is one provision where we have not touched a single word. We passed it as it has been. And the last thing, what you said about just to, like this is our second time, the BTRC chairman and I in the public forum we were speaking, and he gave the data on 27,000, the request of this thing. Probably 3 months we are working each other. Like in public, I want to disclose that at least from our side, there was not one request from the government, from me to him for one post removal. So this is just, I want to lay it out in public that yes, we'll follow the process, yes, we'll protect, but in full disclosure, we say that it would be good to know in public that 3 months we have been working, God knows how many hours we have spent in different meetings, different things, but we want to make sure that there is a due process and procedure, and the people and the process to take place. It's not the political decision or political enforcement. He and I didn't have even one discussion about one single post removal. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to actually kind of request anyone from the government bodies to make any sort of policies or draft policies you make to be more, to consult in a bit more open manner, because I think that's very important, because I have a lot of colleagues here. Some of us know about certain things certain times, and some of us don't know about those things. And we have been talking, a lot of my colleagues have been talking about platform accountability, and a few years ago we had a draft BTRC regulation, which Shazir, you definitely remember, and we don't want something like that. That was like a clear threat to freedom of expression. That was obviously acquired very much from India, so India is obviously not our model all the time. So I think if we have wider consultation, maybe those flaws can come out, and we can also have, perhaps try to have a better kind of regulation that everyone would kind of try to accept. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and sum up. Essentially what we talked about was we need to clearly set policies about data protection systems and practices. We do not have a well thought out framework. It needs to be more consolidated. International ordinances are to be further discussed. It is essential to set out clear definitions of terms and have guidelines. For example, what is legal and what is disinformation? Laws should address illegal content, while independent platforms may manage harmful but legal content through mitigation measures. We need independent regulators and overseeing agencies or bodies who will not be appointed by the government, as governments might become rough and use laws to intimidate the citizens. These agencies cannot receive restrictions from the government. We've seen an example of that already. Another question raised is that we should involve the judiciary when law enforcement agencies access data of the citizens. How do we further improve the existing process? We need to introduce age verification mechanisms to protect children online. Issues were raised about fact-checking limitations and on the implementation process, existing lack of data localization and need to close the gaps. We need to have platform transparency, how the algorithm modifications are working in the background, and platforms must have liability towards regulatory government agencies. I would like to add that this really for me has been wonderful, because it's very rare to have as open and candid a discussion as we've just had today, and I would particularly like to thank those of you who are in authority to come up with that position, to be open in that manner. And you see that as a welcoming sign in terms of the way we need to go forward, because we will make mistakes, all of us will. But provided we're prepared to listen, provided we are not closing doors, provided we are not being authoritarian, I think it can all be worked out. This is a huge window of opportunity that we have. And I, of course, want to thank the Nagori Coalition and UNESCO for putting all this together. And I hope that this is the beginning of many such events, because if these begin to happen, what will happen beyond anything else is there will be trust. And in the end, that is the one word that I think puts everything together. Provided we can trust our government, and provided the government can trust the public and the private sector, I think we have the mechanism for going forward. Thank you, everyone. There's refreshments. I'm sure some of you might hang around and this conversation can continue. Thank you.